Day, ano to? Day, anong day na to? Day 3? No. Day 3. Yung light ng ano mo, cellphone mo. Yung light mo naka-on.
Naka-on daw yung light.
Okay. Day 3. Halifax, Nova Scotia. Okay, this is Halifax now. Hindi pa nag-change ang mga kulay. Yeah?
Daming stores.
I know. Ang ganda nga eh. Magkabili ng mga yung souvenir natin.
Yeah.
Basta magnets lang, okay na sa akin. The pink hop on, hop off. Look at that. Antique bus that go hop on, hop off. There's another one. Oh, the red one.
I could be walking down the street from Boston.
Right after I said there's a sector.
I think there's a hobo style.
Another hop on, hop off. Oh wow. Look at them. Oh, dati na pang
You got me on there. You guys have your buildings?
There's something wrong with our bus. We can't go. Yeah, we're
Aside
ready
from the
to
box,
go.
what else?
I don't know. Everything is not in the right place. Okay. Yeah, there's still. Oh, the boat is going now. The. Oh, wait. Bye bye. They're leaving. What about us? We're left behind.
Oh, the first bus.
The first bus went the last bus.
From the Boston area. Remember, it was still a British colony back then. So the war is over. The treaty is settled back in France and England, and the British gave Louisbourg back to the French in exchange for 2 towns in Belgium. So I'm a soldier from Boston back then. I lost my best buddy in Louisbourg. I lost, had a wound, maybe I lost a hand or an arm, and I'm not happy. Like, we gave it all back to them. So they wanted protection from Louisbourg. That was the reason for the founding of Halifax in 1749.
Oh, look at that.
But before I continue with the history lesson, military cemetery on the right-hand side of the bus. And now the second half is the earlier Catholic cemetery here in Halifax. The little church in the trees there is Our Lady of Sorrows Chapel. An enterprising Catholic bishop almost 200 years ago decided he wanted a church at that location. Didn't have any money. So he had a lot of Irish laborers donate the labor, and he had somebody donate the material, but they treated it like a barn raising. They would have come in on the weekend and put the walls up and got the roof on, but as we all know, they would have done the interior over the ensuing weeks. However, historians call it the church that was built in a day. I just tell people it's the first prefab in Canada. So we're making a right-hand turn onto South Park. The large complex you're seeing in the foreground, it'll soon be on the left side of the bus, is Victoria General Hospital. And of course, a lot of landmarks in Halifax are named after connections to Britain. If you're not aware of this, Canada is not a republic. We are a constitutional monarchy, which means our head of state is the sovereign. So for all of my life until 2 years ago, that was Queen Elizabeth. And of course now it's her son Charles. Ceremonial roles only. They have no political power. And of course in Canada we have a lieutenant governor in each province. I'll be showing you his house later this afternoon when we come back into town. And of course in Ottawa we have a governor general. They just act on Charles' behalf. But like I said, completely ceremonial roles. No political power. But it frees up the politicians to do what they should be doing. At least that's the concept. The park along the left side of the bus is called Victoria Park. We get up to the end of the park, there's going to be a statue to Robbie Burns. Anybody from Scottish descent on board? Nobody? Wow. So Robbie Burns, if you don't know, is probably the most famous Scot, and I would suggest you all sing his song on New Year's, Auld Lang Syne. So if there's any significant number of Scots anywhere in the world, they put up a statue to Robbie Burns. And of course the statue is right there on the left. Now if you're looking to the left, there's the entrance to the public gardens, one of the entrances. That's the Victoria Gardens. The only true Victoria Gardens left in North America, they suggest. It's a 16-acre site, very popular with prom pictures and wedding pictures. Some of you may tour there this afternoon. I would strongly suggest it this time of year. And if the guide on the hop-on bus doesn't tell you, go see the Dahlia Garden. So the British liked their gardens. Now that garden, the way it's structured now, that 16 acres, was designed in the 1870s. The head gardener's name was Robert Power. He was an Irishman. And we're going to go through the intersection, and on the left side of the bus, some of you can already see a very attractive red brick house with green trim. That's the gardener's house. So kind of a nice position to get. He lived there for 50 years, and then he was replaced by his son. The son got to live there. Subsequent gardeners don't. It's now administrative offices. And the interesting piece of trivia about Mr. Power, he arrived here in Halifax. He was only in his 20s. He had trained in Ireland, but then he went down to New York and he trained under the gentleman that designed Central Park in New York. And I'm racking my 71-year-old brain. His name was Olmsted. Correct? Usually have somebody from the U.S. hollering at me. Yes, you're right, Liam. I know it's Sunday morning. So we're going to go through this intersection. On the right-hand side of the bus is your first glimpse of the Citadel, the reason for Halifax's founding. It doesn't look like much because it's a dry moat system built into the terrain. The only way to appreciate it is to look at a photograph or visit it, which you all have the option of this afternoon. But there was never a battle fought in Halifax. So we go past the gardener's house. On the left side of the bus, you're going to see a small pop-up stadium. They can get about 7,000 people in there for our semi-pro professional soccer team. And then there's a paddock for an equestrian center here on the left. A couple of horses in the smaller paddock. There should be some more in the exercise yard. If you're a young person here in Halifax, you want to learn horsemanship, you join the Bengal Lancers. On the right-hand side of the bus is Citadel High School. That opened in 2010, 1,500 students. Interesting building. They try to make it environmentally friendly. For example, they collect all the rainwater to flush the toilets. And of course, coming into view on the right side of the bus is an expanse of a lot of playing fields. There's ball diamonds, basketball courts, cricket pitches, tennis courts. There's a swimming pool. There's an Olympic-sized ice skating oval. And very strategically located across from the hospital is the skateboarding park here on the right. So the Commons, as the name suggests, was a gift to the common people by the British Crown, a couple hundred years ago. It was 200 acres. They've allowed the hospitals, the school, the public gardens to be built on part of the original 200 acres, but there's never been private development on the Commons. It's extremely valuable real estate. Every developer in Halifax would love to get their hands on it. But if you look down to the right, kind of back a little ways, those of you that can see white horizontal flags flying. They go around an Olympic-sized ice skating oval. Now, an ice skating oval, outdoor oval, is a pretty significant ice surface. You can probably put 600 or 700 skaters on it. It was originally built for the Canada Winter Games back in 2010. And of course, they put in ice making equipment so they can maintain ice as long as the temperature. So that skating oval was going to be temporary. When the games were over, they decided to let the public use it for the rest of that winter. Well, that was extremely popular. So then there was a petition or a movement, let's make it permanent. So City Council said, okay, we'll make it permanent. And then another motion was made, let's make it free. That passed, so skating is free. Well, then the first winter, if you're going to have several hundred people skating in an outdoor surface, just the same as you've had public skating in a hockey arena, you have to have monitors. There's got to be somebody on the ice, to keep track of things. Like, I don't want to suggest they're bouncers, but, same idea, if you will. And of course, you hire guys that are hockey players and ladies that are maybe figure skaters or hockey players. And most of them are college and high school students. Well, one young man, his name is Gerard Bray, he said to City Council, okay, we got free skating. What if you're visiting Halifax? You're not going to have your skates with you. Why don't we provide a free skate rental? And they said, how are we going to do that? He said, we'll just have a skate drive. You go to anywhere in Canada, I'm sure you're going to find skates in somebody's basement, their attic, their garage. History back here to Nova Scotia because that's what their family history told them. And they have what they call Acadian Congresses here in Atlantic Canada, where these extended families reconnect. Now, we've just traversed a peninsula that we consider the real Halifax, if you will. And it's, like I said, if you looked at that rough map on that brochure I handed out, you'll see what looks like a small inlet we call the Northwest Arm. We're coming up on it now. It's like a back harbor, if you will. And of course, this is where there's several yacht clubs. As we come down we're on Quinpool Road. You'll notice if you look over one of the several yacht clubs. I'm lucky enough to have 4 friends with boats across the way there. Everything from a 28-footer to a 42. So I go out. I do a lot of boating on Halifax Harbor with friends, my wife and I. My intent was when I came back to Nova Scotia back in 2000, I was going to buy a boat. I haven't bought one yet because I got those 4 friends. But more importantly, I got a brother-in-law that has a summer place out by Peggy's Cove, but I'll tell his story later. So we're heading out to a little rotary here. Those of you that can easily look behind the bus, so to speak, to my left and your left, back down towards the ocean, if you look out that inlet, on the opposite shore, it'll be easier as we go around the roundabout. You'll see what looks like a clock tower or a lookout tower peeking out of the trees on the other side. Anybody see it? Yeah. That's Dingle Tower. Dingle Tower. And it's literally just a lookout tower that was built about 150 years ago on the estate of Sir Sandford Fleming, a very successful engineer. He was Scottish born, but he came here as a young man with his family. He worked on the Canadian railway system. He was a bit of an inventor. He designed the first Canadian postage stamp. But more importantly, we use his invention every minute of the day, one of his inventions, because he's the man behind standardized time. In the 1850s, there was time zones all around the world, but if you left from Boston and you arrived in Halifax on a steamship, you knew there was an hour's difference in the time, but your watch might be off by 3 or 4 minutes compared to the Halifax time. And that's because nobody had actually standardized all the zones around the world to a specific, down to what they call, as we all know, Greenwich Mean Time, I think is the proper term. He's the man behind that, Sir Sandford Fleming, which is a perfect time for me to check our watches, because timing is critical on this tour to get you out there and get you back so you can go on your hop-on, hop-off trip. I've got 8 minutes to 11. So when we get to Peggy's, I'm going to give you a time to be back on this bus, and it's going to be critical that you get back on, because you're not catching an Uber out at Peggy's Cove. So Nova Scotia is a very unique landmass. We are roughly, area-wise, the size of West Virginia. West Virginia is actually larger than Nova Scotia as far as the landmass. We're smaller than the country of Scotland for comparison purposes. But because we're a peninsula connected to the North American continent by a 12-mile isthmus at the New Brunswick border, plus the island of Cape Breton where you're going tomorrow, we have over 5,000 miles of coastline because of the irregular shape of the coast. You'll notice our license plates state Nova Scotia, Canada's ocean playground.
Yes.
Now we're traveling out to the North Atlantic coast, a very rugged coastline. A lot of rock, a lot of little inlets and bays. You're not going to see anything on this tour this morning resembling farmland. If you had taken a different tour, which I'm sure some of your fellow guests on the ship did, a vineyard tour or a tour to see the ocean floor, they've gone down to the Annapolis Valley. So there's buses left this morning. They're going to drive about the same distance we're driving, and people will walk out on the floor of the ocean if the timing is right. And then 6 hours later, they would have been covered with 40 feet of water. That's where the world's highest tides are in the Bay of Fundy. And of course, the land mass on that side of the province is where all the farming is. And that's where the vineyards and the orchards are. The other interesting feature of Nova Scotia, it doesn't matter where you go, you can't get more than 40 miles from the ocean. That's as far inland as you can go, is 40 miles.
40 miles, wow.
But there's not a lot of settlement in the interior of the province. It's basically everybody settled on the coast or down the valley, which is close to the Bay of Fundy, obviously. Same in Cape Breton. Tour boat and went to Sydney, came to Halifax the following day, and had an interesting conversation with her because she just couldn't get over the changes. Well, if you take an industry that employed 15,000 men out of a community that only has about 100,000 people, it changes. So as far as our vegetation, we have what we call Acadian forest, mixture of basically half softwood, half hardwood. The area we're driving through today, this would all be at least third generation growth. Not good for much of anything except pulp and paper. Some of the hardwood obviously could be used for firewood. The only original growth forest left in Nova Scotia is on Cape Breton Island. And of course for plant, your normal type of vegetation. Our climate is very similar to New England I should say. And as far as animals, the moose is the largest mammal we have. Lots of them in Cape Breton. We have a lot of white-tailed deer. We have black bear. There's enough black bear in Nova Scotia to have a hunting season. We have link and bobcat, your normal assortment of smaller woodland creatures, your skunks, your raccoons, your porcupines. We don't have any poisonous snakes in Nova Scotia. All we have is garter snakes, and they're not poisonous. And of course, along the coastline, lots of seabirds, your seagulls, your gannets, your cormorants, you might call them shags. And of course, the two predatory birds that we are quite plentiful in Nova Scotia are bald eagles and osprey. Osprey are sometimes nicknamed the fishhawk. They're the provincial bird. And of course, we'll see 200 cruise ships in Halifax in a season. About 150 are going to show up in September, October. We've got 2 in town today. We had 4 in on Friday. September 30th, we're going to have 6 in town. Doris and I are going to take the day on. It's been built by the Canadian National Railway, and it's your classic old 30s style hotel on the interior where you got the Art Deco design in the ballrooms and the meeting rooms. Thankfully, the Westin chain bought it and refurbished it. But the whole area on the lower part of the peninsula there was revitalized by the cruise industry. If a cruise ship comes into Atlantic Canadian waters, it comes to Halifax. Like I said, we'll see probably 200 plus ships a year. St. John, New Brunswick will see between 100 and 120, I think is their number. Sydney will see probably 150. Prince Edward Island may get 100, and so at Charlottetown. And of course, most of them go up to either Quebec City or Montreal. They'll sometimes stop at Saguenay. I'm not sure what your tour is doing. Every company sells a different combination of stops. But like I said, if you're coming to Atlantic Canada on a cruise ship, you're coming to Halifax.
Of course.
So I'm going to take a break from the mic. I'm going to walk through the bus. I'll answer any questions about anything that we've spoken of so far. I may defer a question to later in the tour because I know I'm going to be talking about it later. And then I'll come back on the mic and talk about the fishing industry and what Peggy's Cove is all about. The fishery and the fur trade. Now, obviously, here in Nova Scotia, the fishing is the big thing. There was some fur trade, I guess, but you have to go further to the interior, especially in Ontario, Quebec, and where they're after the beaver. But here in Atlantic Canada, cod was king for several hundred years. And of course, the same for anybody that lived in the New England area. I mean, Gloucester, Massachusetts is the legendary community on the New England coast when it comes to the cod fishery.
There's the
And I would
salt
suggest
water.
here in Nova Scotia it would be Lunenburg. And of course, there's multiple communities on our neighboring province of Newfoundland. And they were fishing on the Georgia Bank and the Grand Bank, and they were going after cod. And cod was an easy fish to catch. And you salted it and dried it and you shipped it back to Europe. So it was the food staple source for a lot of Europeans for a few hundred years. But when they came along in the 60s and 70s with larger and larger ships, what they call factory ships, and they literally just kind of dragged the ocean floor, they decimated the stock. And by 1993, Canada called a moratorium on the cod fishery. There has not been a commercial cod fishery in Atlantic Canada in over 30 years. They had thought the stock would replenish. It didn't come back the way they thought. And now there's talk of a limited fishery next year from a commercial point of view. Now for the people's own personal consumption, in Newfoundland they have what they call the fresh fish fishery, meaning so many days a year you're allowed to go out and you're allowed to catch 10 cod per person on the boat. And I've been over there when that happens, and you'd be amazed how many people can get on a boat so they can get their 10 per person.
Yeah.
I mean, cod is a nice tasting fish, and I've got lots of Newfoundland friends. My brother-in-law that I'll talk about later, he's a Newfoundlander, and they think cod is the only true fish. And historically, if you talk about fish and chips, it should be cod. But if you're going to get fish and chips in Atlantic Canada today, it's going to be haddock. Or if you're lucky, and they'll charge you more, it'll be halibut. So, cod is no longer king. Now, the number one fishery in Nova Scotia is the lobster fishery. It's a $1 billion industry. Now, most of you are probably familiar with the market lobster that you see in a seafood restaurant in a tank. That lobster is between 6 and 8 years of age. It likely weighs on average 1.5 pounds. If I owned a seafood restaurant, I'd want every lobster to be between 1.25 pounds and 1.75 pounds. If you own a chicken restaurant, you want every chicken to be 3 pounds. But, and of course, the lobster don't necessarily cooperate, but I like, personally, when I have lobster, I'm going to have a lobster boil in 2 weeks with some friends, and we'll buy 3-pounders. The difference is, when you buy those market ones at the fishmonger or the grocery store, you're going to eat the tail and the 2 claws. You're likely not going to take the effort to get the meat out of the legs because it's just too much work for too little satisfaction, if you will. When you buy a 3-pounder, that's a lot more fun. And there's no shortage of lobster. They're having an issue apparently in the state of Maine, in the Gulf of Maine. They're seeing a drop-off in their lobster because the water's getting warmer. Lobster doesn't like warm water. They're moving further north. And the coast of Newfoundland is seeing an increase in their lobster. So there's no concern at this point in Atlantic Canada about the amount of lobster being caught. There's lots of them. And of course they have a season though, depending on where you are along the coast. All they do is follow the calendar. So this part of the province, their fishery doesn't open until the last Monday of November. And they fish through the winter season. Now they get a particularly long season because it is the winter, and most of them will only fish probably up until about New Year's. They'll pull their traps and maybe go back out in March. January and February is not a great time to be on the North Atlantic. Cape Breton, where you're headed tomorrow, the Sydney area, their fishery is usually May and June. They'll run a 2-month lobster fishery there. And of course the licenses are quite expensive. The smallest license they sell is for you to have permission to have 250 traps. And that's going to run you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course, when I was young, I knew that they put lobster in a refrigerated truck and they shipped it to New York, Boston, Toronto, Montreal. And I also knew that you can't sell a dead lobster unless he's in a can. You have to get him to market live. So in the last 25, 30 years, they've developed container systems that they can ship them all over the world by airplane. And of course, there's a special terminal at Halifax International Airport for shipping lobster. And it's estimated about 40% of the Nova Scotia catch goes to China.
Oh.
They like their lobster. It's a huge market. So it looks like we're around mid-tide right now.
Tide.
If I remember when I get to Peggy's, or if somebody asks me, I'll look it up on my phone and tell you when high tide is going to arrive out here. Or low, I'm just not sure which end of the cycle we're on. I didn't look this morning. And then usually when I'm sitting at the bus waiting for you people to show up, I look up a couple of stats like that are daily, but I was preoccupied with this sound system. So I'll make a point of looking it up, I guess, at Peggy's. So, Peggy's Cove is famous because of the lighthouse and the fact that it's a picturesque little village that artisans started showing up in the early part of the 20th century. And I know enough about transportation that in the 1920s, if I had a Model T Ford, which had a top speed of 30 miles an hour on a dirt road, I could have driven out from Halifax to Peggy's Cove and back in the same day. And that's what started happening. People want to go to the picturesque village where the artist had painted these pictures of the lighthouse, the rocks, and the little village. It just became a tourist destination. And a lot of painters would make their, have a summer place out here. Well, one painter in particular, his name was William de Garth. He was a Finnish gentleman. He was making, he named the bay Marguerite. And to the best of my knowledge, Peggy is not a nickname in French for Marguerite, unless somebody corrects me. So I go with the folklore and local legend about Peggy being the survivor of a shipwreck. Now, when it was in its peak over 100 years ago, there would have only been 300 people living in Peggy's Cove. You'd actually have to go back to the 1900s when people were willing to spend their life out here. The only reason you'd be in Peggy's Cove is if you were a fisherman. It's a pretty bleak existence in the middle of the winter, which you'll note by the vegetation when we get out there. But they did have a church, which still stands, a school, a one-room schoolhouse, which is now a museum, and of course there was a store, which is now a residence. But the permanent residency of Peggy's Cove these days, there's less than 40 people will spend the winter out here. So most of the residents that you'll see when we get there belong to somebody involved with the tourist trade, or they're an artist, or they're a summer place. There's still a couple of fishermen out there, but you're not going to see any significant size fishing boats out here. I mean, they do some lobster fishing and ground fishery off of Peggy's Cove, but the bigger fishing communities are further down the coast. For example, there's a place called Barrington where you'd see the much larger fishing fleet. But we'll go through the last community that we'll drive through on the way to Peggy's Cove is West Dover. I'll point out a couple of houses in West Dover. The locals tell me belong to Lobster Captains, the guy that owns the license. And when I show you those two homes, I think you'll understand why it's kind of lucrative to have the license. But like, I'm from this area. I mean, I come up to Peggy's Cove quite often. I was born here. My wife's an Alberta girl, though she didn't have any experience with the ocean. I got some Canadians on board, so they'll understand what I'm going to tell you. If you grow up in Atlantic Canada, especially if you're from Nova Scotia, Cape Breton in particular, or you're a Newfoundlander, and you go to other parts of Canada,
You don't want to
most of the Canadians seem to realize that a Cape Bretoner, a Newfoundlander, Nova Scotia, they always want to go home. So I ended up in Western Canada after university, and I was living in Calgary, working for a bank, when I met my wife. Once we got serious, she said, "Liam, I'm never living in Nova Scotia, just so you know." I said, "Okay." And of course we got married. I took a transfer to Toronto, and then in 2000 I got transferred to Halifax. And by then we had two sons. She misses her Rocky Mountains, but she likes the ocean better. That we're going through called West Dover. we'll be entering the Peggy's Cove Conservation Area, and you'll see no further development other than the little village
Look at
of
that.
Peggy's Cove. They have their own governance there. The people that live there, they have control over what happens there, and they don't allow any significant commercial development.
Look at their house.
You're not allowed to build a 3-story building in Peggy's Cove. And the government controls everything around it. And it's just a large conservation area. So if you're looking to the left of the bus, or where the Canada flag is flying forward, this brick house with the brick fence in front, he's a lobster captain.
Oh.
I don't think he does too bad. And the guy up on the hill here with the gray house with the terrace gardens in front,
Yeah.
he's a lobster captain. They tell me he spends his winters in Florida. And if I lived on that
sure.
hill, I'd be down in Florida in January too. I've been out here in January and February. It's not if it's a windy, wintry day, it's a different experience. Notice how the vegetation has changed. You don't see any hardwood trees. The climate is just too severe. If you look over to the right, see that large rock on the hill over there? Roughly the size of a small car? I always think it's fascinating to think that rock's been there since the ice melted from the Ice Age. They call those erratics. A geologist will tell you that's an erratic.
There's the road
That's just
there.
where it fell when the ice melted. That's the same with everything you see around you. We call these the barrens. Lots of blueberries and cranberries. Pretty bleak out here, as I stated in January, February. My wife likes to come out and take photographs of the sun setting behind the lighthouse. And of course, you know, you can look at an afternoon sky and you're going to be able to predict that what the sunset will be like. I was out here Friday night. It's the first time I've ever been out here when the sun is setting with a tour bus. And the only reason that happened, the tour that day was an hour and a half late. But it wasn't the bus problem, the ship got in late. They had a medical emergency in St. John and they returned to port. So by the time they got to Halifax, they had to modify all the tours. And it was interesting. A whole lot of people apparently canceled. I did the last tour of the day. I only had 14 people. And those 14 people were ecstatic because, of course, they got to see a phenomenal sunset. And the sun sets, when you're in the parking lot out here, the sun sets behind the lighthouse. I had one young lady, the photographs that she took were spectacular. It was just that, you know, red sunset, red, yellow, orange colors. It was fantastic. The only downside was, you know, by the time we get back into Halifax, it's dark. So I could point out the buildings that they have lights on, like the significant buildings will have floodlights, but they didn't care. They saw a sunset at Peggy's Cove, which I told them, you know, first time I've ever done it. I've been out there lots on my own, but not with a tour at sunset. Obviously, we're not going to see the sunset today. I shouldn't be saying anything, right? You know, this is my 5th summer doing this. I retired 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, well, actually longer, 2019 was the first year I worked, and then we lost 2 years to COVID. But I went to a Christmas party. My wife works 2 days a week at IKEA in Playland. Just something to get out of the house. And went to the Christmas party, and the husband of a friend of hers she works with was doing this job, and we talked over during the Christmas party. And he said, Liam, you should come out and check out this tour business. I didn't know anything about it. So now all my friends say to me, Liam, they actually pay you to tell stories? Jeez. That's fun. Like, I'll work maybe 40 days a year, 40, 45 days. Most of that will be the next 2 months. Meet a lot of interesting people, and I never get tired of coming out to Peggy's Cove or going to Lunenburg or taking people around Halifax. I mean, I do all the tours they offer. I even do the hop on, hop off, although they've only had me on it once or twice this summer. They usually pull me over in the coach. Some guys try to specialize, but I don't understand why you want to do that. So, there's the church. If you're looking to your left. Oh man, this is not looking good. There's a bus down here already, which is, although we could get lucky. If a bus leaves as we're getting in, we can grab their spot. Hey, there's one leaving. Yeah, maybe we'll get lucky when we get up there. We're not going to know until we get up there. It's not going to affect the tour.
Really?
Jesus. God, you wanna die?
So let's hope that we're lucky and we get a spot right up at the lighthouse. So I need you back on the bus at 12:20, please.
12:20,
And
okay.
I need you all on board at 12:20. And either it's going to be where we park the bus, or if Doris is forced to drop us off, it's going to be there. So as we rise in the hill here, if you look to your left where those lobster traps are, that's a tourist bureau building, and there's a yellow building there that has washrooms. On the right, there's the guard's little house that he kept adding on to. Look to the right. See the carving?
Oh, yeah, there.
So if you're able, I really suggest you come walking down the hill and check out the carving. That is a washroom in this building. Oh my God, there's a line up at that washroom already. If they're lined up there, they're definitely going to be lined up by the, so you might want to go across to the tourist bureau. There's the cove right there on the right.
Over there.
That's Peggy's Cove. And we're going to go up the hill. I think I see a parking spot up there. I don't see the whole area up by the restaurant filled, so maybe we'll get lucky. Now, Doris is going to slow down for me for a moment right here. If you look down to the dock, you see the large light standard. Just in front of it, you see a pole that says 149. See the yellow funnel with a bit of red cap on it? The man's just walking by it.
Yes.
Anybody want to tell me what it is?
No.
Saltwater fire hydrant.
Oh.
Look around. Nobody's got a well. They're all sitting on rock. They got cisterns. So if there's a fire out here, that's what the fire department's going to hook up to. I tell people, take a photograph of that and ask your friends to guess what it is. And the Peggy's boat tour is just leaving out through the little channel. I've come in here in a small boat, well, a 30-footer myself, and you better know where you are, and you better have proper electronics on board because there's shoals everywhere. There's the lighthouse over the right, and you can see the walkway is all level. What they're doing is look at the lighthouse, and they walk right in front of cars.
Wow. Nice. Let's go. Dakam. Huwag ka nang pumunta dyan. Malaglag ka pa. Okay. Yeah, we're on Peggy's Cove. Wow, ganda. Ada ka?
We're cruising down the bay, and we had an experience that we'll never see it again. It was just a fluke. I estimate the tuna weighed 400 or 500 pounds. It broke the surface of the water in front of the boat, went straight up into the air and down again, like you'd see in a Disney movie. An absolutely spectacular sight. Unfortunately, not one of those 20-year-olds had their phone on, so nobody actually captured it. But one young lady turned. Some of them are just summer homes. People that live in Toronto, Montreal, maybe Boston. There's a historical connection between the New England area and Atlantic Canada. But I'll talk about that again in a few moments. So there's the sailing club is right over there where most of that wharf activity is. So Dawson. The J. Dawson we had buried in Halifax, his name was James Dawson. He was a coal leveler on the Titanic. Now that name suggests that all he was doing, he and some other men, were leveling the coal. Coal is a loose aggregate. It would act as a fuel, for the Titanic. And of course, if it's loose, you got to keep it level because it's like ballast on a ship. Lowest paying job, dirtiest job on a sailing vessel, a steamship back then. Nothing in the historical records would suggest that he had the sparkling good looks story, and he claims he didn't know there's a J. Dawson buried here. But that movie comes out, young ladies from all over the world decided we got DiCaprio buried in Halifax. And they started coming to Halifax and putting some flowers on that headstone. not as common today, but it was quite common for her first 5 years of that movie coming out. But it's been over 25 years since it came out, but it still happens. And of course, 5 years later, we were hit with the Halifax explosion.
Oh, yeah.
Now that story isn't as well known to people from around the world that come to Halifax because, of course, it was wartime, and a lot of things that happened in wartime at the time are not as well publicized as it would be during peacetime. And that's partially why, unless you're a fan of Canadian history or you're Canadian maybe. I lived out in Alberta, and of course there's Canadians on board can verify this. They call it the dry cold and the dry heat out in Alberta. Like nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but it's rare to have air conditioning out there. Temperature's a little higher on the prairies, but they don't have the
I think
humidity.
that bridge is splits.
The only place I've ever, and I've lived, central Canada here and the west. The only place I wanted air conditioning was when I lived in Toronto. They get that muggy central North American, heat stuff for humidity for 2 or 3 months in the, June, July, and August. It's just, I can't stand it.
Wow.
I was at a Peggy's yesterday. It was a little cooler than it was today. A guy had come along. He was off the, what shit do we have in yesterday? It doesn't matter. Anyway, he was dressed in kind of almost like a ski parka. And I'm standing there the way I'm dressed now with my shirt sleeves. And he said, "Aren't you cold?" And I'm thinking, like, no. But I said, the water in the ocean right now is above 60 degrees Fahrenheit, so the wind off that is not cold. You're out there in April, I'd have my jacket on because the water would be 35 degrees and the wind would be cold. But this time of year. So if you were looking ahead, you'd see another one of those hop-on buses. They come down along here on Barrington. But by doing what we just did, going through the Hydrostone and going by the Admiralty House, and me telling you when I showed you where those crane elevators were,